Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Mediwake, and welcome to Your Morning, the podcast. We appreciate you spending the next hour with us.
I'm Lindsey Deluce, and today we're talking tech, we're talking science, and we're talking social media. Oh, and there's a big medical development to let you know about, too.
And I'm Kelsey McEwen. Thanks for joining us today. Also coming up on the podcast, could AI make you a safer driver? We'll talk about it with CTV science and tech expert Dan Riskin.
But first, can I talk royals and royal life for just a moment? Some of our listeners will know India Hicks as one of Princess Diana's young bridesmaid at her wedding to then Prince Charles. She's also a goddaughter to the now King Charles, but her royal connections go back farther than that. Her mom was Lady Pamela, and she was one of Queen Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting. In fact, she was with the monarch when she went from being a princess to the Queen. So India Hicks has now written this remarkable book about her mother's life and connections to royal life. I had tea with her when she was here in Toronto, and she told me a lot of stories, but this hilarious one about having some photos I've never before seen pictures developed.
You also have access to this incredible archive of slides and photos from that time. Can you tell us the story, though, of getting those slides turned into photographs? Snappy snaps, I think, is involved.
Snappy snaps, absolutely. You're brilliant. You've done your homework so well. So when I began to really dig deep on the book, and I realized it wasn't just going to be a reading book, it was going to be an illustrated book with all this rich, extraordinary content, I went into what my parents called the muniment room, where they live in Oxfordshire. I began to dig deep in those archives. And I came across this funny little box of slides, and it was so dusty, and I held them up to the light, I couldn't even really see what was on the slide. So I nipped into Oxford, and I nipped into Snappy Snaps, who develop slides still. And I went back 3 days later to pick up my box of slides, and there was an entire roll of the Queen.
Wow.
The Queen having tea, the Queen with her corgis, the Queen on a horse, the Queen getting ready for Trooping of the Colour. And I was thrilled, of course, because there were these pictures that had never been seen before. Most of them I kept private. Two I felt that could be shown and shared in the book. One in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. She's either dismounted or is about to mount for the Trooping of the Colour. And the other one is riding with my mother at Broadlands, her home in Hampshire. But I did wonder, what do the dudes at Snappy Snaps think?
This is what I was thinking.
And this whole series of pictures of the late Queen.
Never before seen pictures of the Queen.
Yes, they didn't say a thing.
So India Hicks, she obviously shares so much of her life. She's a designer, and a lot of that can be found on Instagram. She's got more than 400,000 followers on that platform. Now, there is a new social media platform dominating the conversation. You've probably heard about it. It's Blue Sky. It is growing at an astounding rate.
Yeah, the platform is gaining followers fast, and since the U.S. election in November, it's growing at a rate of nearly 1 million users a day.
Yeah, lots of people obviously jumping on, including us here at Your Morning. Here's Yasmin Gagne, Associate Editor at Fast Company, to explain why it's growing so quickly.
Okay, what's the draw to Blue Sky?
What's the draw to Blue Sky? That is the 24 million user question. So I think to understand the draw to Blue Sky, we have to think about Twitter or X, right? And I think something we've seen in the past few months is that X is controlled by an all-powerful algorithm. And the owner of X is Elon Musk. And we've seen Elon Musk likely use that all-powerful algorithm to help President Trump. So a platform that was considered bipartisan at one point is no longer. And what does it mean to use an algorithm to help someone? It means surfacing posts or spreading news that may kind of espouse one particular message. So I think that's something that has really put people off the platform in a way it hadn't before. How Blue Sky differs is a really interesting question, right? Because it looks like Twitter when you log on. And to
it looks like what
understand
Twitter used to look like and what X doesn't look like anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think the way to understand it is to think about why Blue Sky was founded. It was founded in 2020 as part of Twitter. So Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey basically thought, how could we build Twitter but on a decentralized protocol? I'll explain what that means in a minute. They worked on it and then eventually spun it out in 2022, just before Elon Musk took over the platform, because he was not interested in that. A decentralized protocol means that it offers users a lot more features and flexibility. And unlike X or Twitter, where Musk has sort of complete control over one algorithm, users have a lot more control over what they see and the posts that service, and can actually kind of design their own feeds.
Well, see, and that's a real appeal for people who feel like they want to be able to craft and control sort of more of their messaging, what they see, what they don't see. Blue Sky, we mentioned this off the top, saw some real high-speed growth following the U.S. election. According to the website data tracker SimilarWeb, usage on Blue Sky has gone up by more than 500% since the beginning of November. What's behind that? Is it content only?
I think it's a combination of content and more the fact that people are looking for an alternative to X or Twitter, right, post-election. So, I think, and Blue Sky sort of emerged as that alternative. We've also seen a lot of really prominent figures join Blue Sky, giving it more legitimacy. I think just yesterday I was seeing our Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined and was the first person to reach 1 million followers on the platform. Here in New York, we've got official government agencies and organizations like our comptroller on there, and then there's business people, billionaire Mark Cuban, who had a lot of followers on X. Actors, everyone from Barbara Streisand to Weird Al have joined. So I think it sort of became this like flywheel, or there was a critical mass of people joining that has kind of helped everybody migrate over to it.
Does this cause further sort of polarization, especially when I look south of the border, between which users are going to be on X and which users are going to gravitate to Blue Sky?
I think it's certainly possible. But I also think that it's, the premise of that question maybe is a little irrelevant at this point. And by that, I mean, X is already quite a polarized place. I think if we have an algorithm that prioritizes certain posts that, have one political message, if it's owned by someone who is literally an officer in our government at this point, I think it's fair to say that X is pretty polarized. And yes, right now people think of Blue Sky as this kind of liberal platform, but all it does is give users control over what they see.
Now let's turn to new research that could be life-changing for millions of people in Canada.
Researchers in the UK have found that changing how a certain injection is used to treat people with asthma or COPD might actually make a really big difference.
So Dr. Richard Russell is the department head of immunobiology at King's College London, and he's the lead researcher on this new study. Take a listen.
People who experience asthma or COPD attacks are often given steroids when inhalers are not effective. What issues are there with current treatment options?
Well, I think there's two main problems with current treatment. One is that we treat everybody the same. We assume steroids are going to work, and they don't work very well. And then secondly, we also neglect or don't pay attention to the side effect profile that oral steroids have. Indeed, you should never have more than 5 courses in your life. That's your lifetime dose. But if you have steroids regularly and often, you're going to have diabetes, osteoporosis, weight gain, skin bruising, cataracts, etc. So steroids come, as well as not working very well, they come with a side effect profile, which is not acceptable these days.
I want to ask you about the study. It's absolutely fascinating. So I understand you divided participants into 3 groups, right? So people taking steroids, people taking the injection, and then people taking both. And it found that 74% of participants just taking the steroid needed additional doses. That fell, I'm looking at the numbers here, to 47% for people taking the injection, 42% if you were taking both. So walk us through this. How does this treatment work?
This was really important. First of all, it began by identifying that not all attacks of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease are the same. They are different. And then secondly, we identified the pattern of inflammation that people have based upon this blood cell called the eosinophil. And then we said, hold on, we've got drugs which block the eosinophil. What about if when someone has an attack, we can detect the eosinophils and block them? And so that's what this drug benralizumab actually does. So patients would come to us, we would do a blood test at that point, at that moment, and if their levels of eosinophils were high, we would randomize them into the study, steroids or the drug, benralizumab. And then we followed them for 90 days to see their outcomes. And as you could see, there was a dramatic, and be careful with the number, it's the same number, but was 74% reduction in requirement for further treatment if you had the benralizumab therapy. So this was really stunning, and if I may say, an early Christmas present for our asthma patients.
And for you, too, doing all this research, I mean, what did this feel like for you?
Well, we knew that this was going to work. I think we were confident it was going to work. And what was also really important, Lindsay, was our patients were telling us really quickly this was working. It was a double-blind, randomized controlled trial. We didn't know what arm they were on, but people were feeling better. And so it was a really positive feeling. And when we unblinded it and when we did this statistical analysis, we were, of course, very pleasantly surprised. And we knew this would transform care for asthma and COPD patients.
And we're talking about a lot of people here. I mean, more than 4.6 million Canadians are living with asthma. Another 2 million people in this country live with COPD. So who could benefit most from this?
Well, this is a great point. Remember, what we're talking about here is treating the acute event, the attack. So we would estimated that 50% of asthma attacks have got this particular pattern of inflammation, and probably 30% of attacks based on COPD patients have got this particular inflammation. So in a year, that's going to be probably 1 million events in Canada a year, which is an awful lot. And this will make a huge difference.
When could this be more readily available?
That's a great question, and it's a tricky one. And although there's light, spring is going to come, but actually we're way off that yet. So we need to do a bigger trial. This was a trial of 160 patients. We need to scale it up and do it in several countries, both to make sure our data is robust and absolutely assure our data. Also to check the practical delivery of the medication, how it can be done, because this could be done even in primary care and GPs and in patients' homes. So there's ways of doing this. This is probably around 2.5 years to get the studies done, maybe another 6 months to talk to our regulators about getting it approved. So I would hope 3 years at a minimum, 4 years maximum if we go forward, and we're really hopeful we'll do that.
And we are hopeful as well. Dr. Richard Russell, thanks for your time and walking us through that this morning.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Lindsay.
Sticking with health stories, there are new numbers that show HIV is still a critical public health issue in Canada.
In 2022, we saw the largest jump in new HIV cases in more than 10 years. It's up by nearly 25%. And young people are being hit especially hard.
So here's Miles Sexton, a 2S LGBTQ+ advocate living with HIV, to explain why this is happening and what needs to be done.
Listen, those stats caught me off guard, especially the 15 to 29 and the increase there.
Right.
What do you think is driving this?
You know, unfortunately, there is a lot of barriers, I think, that comes to accessing care when it comes to HIV treatment. You know, I think we all are probably still a little bit scarred when it comes to sexual health and talking about that and being open to talk about that with our doctors. And I think there's just so much stigma that is around it that I think a lot of people, unfortunately, that fear and stigma is stopping them from learning about how to have safer sex, as well as asking for help from their medical professionals out of the fear of being judged.
Well, when I look at that number of 15, that's like middle high school.
Exactly.
So that's right in the middle of education process. So is that a big driver here?
Well, it is. And unfortunately, so many school curriculums, even if we look at Alberta, they've opted out of sexual health education now in Alberta. So it's we're seeing these barriers that are just happening where they're not teaching these types of things in schools. And it's so unfortunate because the numbers show that it's affecting it, right?
Yeah. Testing, we know, is also a key component to stopping the spread of HIV.
Yes.
And we talked about this story earlier this year when the federal government made the decision to discontinue the at-home self-funding, the self-test kits in Canada. How did that play into these numbers?
Well, that's just it, because I think when we have so much stigma and shame around something like HIV, it's being able to test from the safety of your home makes such a big difference, but they cost money, right? And maybe not everyone can afford a $30 self-testing kit, So it's again, it's just creating more barriers for people to not know their status, and it's so unfortunate.
You've mentioned stigma a couple of times, and it's shocking to me still that in 2024, the same stigmas, maybe they look and sound a little different, but the outcome is the same.
Agreed.
So when it comes to people and education, accessing care and stigma, how does that play in, and how do we fight back against it?
I think education is key, right? We need to learn that HIV is not what we think that it was in the 80s. As someone who's been living with HIV, I literally get an injection of my medication every 2 months, and I continue living my fabulous life, and I can't transmit HIV to anyone, And I think a lot of people don't realize that.
I think people don't know what you just said.
Exactly. They don't understand what undetectable equals untransmittable, And we need to sometimes get ourselves out of our comfort zones and to learn about things that maybe we don't think that personally affects us. And I think to your point earlier too, now the largest population of newly diagnosed cases is also in women. And it's no longer men who have sex with men. And I think it's just like we need to put more education out there to like target these new communities that are being affected by HIV.
Okay, well, we have about a minute left in the show. I know that you're a strong educator, so you've got an audience this morning. What would you want them to know?
Yeah, I think like, you know, again, I think we need to start empowering ourselves to like take care of our sexual health and not like, I think allow that sort of shame to, I think, stop us from educating ourselves. And also, I think, too, it's about finding a medical professional that creates a safe environment for you, because it completely changes your, you know, I think the way that you take care of yourself when you're able to like have honest conversations with your doctor when it comes around to getting testing. So
what would you say to people out there who are like, I'm not in a community that has a doctor I can have this conversation with? What can they do?
Yes, so I would definitely highly recommend checking out sexfluent.ca. It's an amazing like kind of empowerment website where you can learn about HIV and mental health and harm reduction and so many things, but it teaches these sort of pieces through the lens of empowerment, as well as like going onto the CanFAR website. It's a great kind of portal for everything you need to know about HIV. I would definitely check out both of those websites.
Miles,
first step.
Miles, great to have you here. I know you're going to get very busy come December 1st. You always are anyway, so I appreciate you stopping here early.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and quickly, if you would like more information, you can visit the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research at canfar.com, as Miles just mentioned. Thanks again for being here.
Of course.
You're listening to Your Morning, the podcast, and we love when you join us live weekday mornings as well. We're on CTV CTV News Channel, or you can stream us live on the CTV News app weekdays, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern and 7 to 10 a.m. Atlantic.
Now, let's talk about artificial intelligence. We've talked a lot about AI in science and research and art, but did you know it could help prevent drowsiness behind the wheel?
Tech companies in California have created new dash cams that are using machine learning to monitor drivers, and then they let out an audio alert about getting some rest when they detect signs of drowsiness.
Here's CTV science and tech expert Dan Riskin to explain exactly how it works.
Okay. Are people wearing things? How are they monitoring drivers?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how can AI make the roads safer, you know, one of the most dangerous things about the roads is the people driving on them. And when it's a truck, like a big semi, the stakes are just way higher. And so the idea is, instead of having the cameras facing out and having to control the car, why don't you face the cameras in, look at the driver, and just keep an eye to make sure that the driver's not showing signs of fatigue that might cause alarm. So, you know, are they yawning? Are they blinking? Are they starting to do things that aren't normally the way they sit in the cab? And if so, maybe by alerting the driver that they're getting kind of tired, maybe an accident can be avoided without having to have fancy systems out the front that have automatic braking and all that other stuff.
And who gets access to this information? Is it just an alert for the driver? Does it go back to the companies?
Yeah, I think that's why this technology is rolling out in caps, is because the people who own the vehicles aren't the people in the cars. So if, you know, when you talk about my car, I don't really want to spend a whole bunch of money on a bunch of cameras that watch me and then tell me if I'm doing a good job. That's not how I want to spend my money, thank you. But if you have a fleet of semis and you have drivers, it might make a lot of sense to deploy these cameras. The drivers really don't have a choice. And then you have increased safety. So the way it would work is that if the driver is starting to show those signs of drowsiness, it does give them an alert. And it says, hey, you're starting to nod off. Maybe you should take a little break, go get some coffee, or call it a day if you can. And if the driver chooses to ignore that alert, then it escalates, and then they can, you know, phone home, so to speak, and alert the company that there's an issue with this driver.
I'm assuming what you're describing for us is baseline, but there are 3 different companies working on this. How do their monitoring products differ?
Yeah, so there's Samsara, there's Motive, and there's Nauto. And those are 3 different companies. And they all have similar ways of doing things. And of course, it's proprietary and they don't want to share secrets with each other. But they look for basic things that you would look for in a person. I mean, yawns, blinking, eye rubbing, slouching in your chair, starting to move your head a little bit like this. And I'll tell you the honest truth. I think this is a good idea. I probably should have this in my car, because we've all been in that situation where we're driving, we don't realize how tired we are, and then we sort of scare ourselves where you're like, oh my gosh, I think I actually just had a micro nap. I need to pull over.
Right.
And you want a warning well before the micro nap, right? And so this would be something that can provide that. So they have different ways of doing it, but they're all sort of getting at the same thing.
Well, fatigue, you just mentioned it. It's cited as the main reason for traffic collisions in about 20% of cases. In 2022, there were 1,700, just over 1,700 fatal traffic collisions in Canada. These dash cams, or this monitoring system, is meant for commercial fleets, but could we see it coming to consumer vehicles?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this might be another one of these features that where if you have it installed, you get a discount on your insurance, for example. And there are ways for artificial intelligence. It doesn't always have to be talking to a cloud, right? Especially if it's getting trained on your data. It might pay attention to you as a driver and learn your habits and learn how you move. And then it can become tweaked to sort of notice when you're starting to have different motions. But it doesn't have to be a situation where as soon as you start to nod off, it alerts the police or something like that, or tells on you to someone. So if it were marketed in a way where people saw it as a safety feature that made them safer without invading their privacy, I think there could be a market for this. But I think they're very smart to start it in commercial fleets where, again, there's a separation between the people who are being spied on and the people who choose whether or not to have it in the cab. When you have that separation, it's just a much easier sell. And I think a really important piece of data will be how truckers respond to this. Do they see it as a safety feature that's helping to keep them safe, or do they see it as an invasion of their privacy?
I remember reading the case study around when seatbelts came in, and there were similar arguments in that, government can't mandate what I do in my own vehicle or whatever else, but ultimately it was adapted, and now you can't buy a car without seatbelts in it. Could we see this following the same path?
Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine it going down that road, or you can down the road, or you can imagine it taking a different sort of path if the privacy concerns come to bear. But there's a lot of things about AI that make it difficult for people to adopt, and one is the sort of opaque nature of it. Just by its nature, you don't really know how it works. Even if you can tell that the AI is paying attention to blinks and nods and things like that, it's still ultimately going to be making judgment calls based on those data that can't totally be explained in words. It's a mathematical formula. And so the fact that AI sort of holds secrets still in the ways that it's been deployed, I think that ultimately might be an Achilles heel for people adopting this kind of thing. Or it might be that we just get so used to using AI in our lives that we're just cool with it. We'll see.
Interesting story either way. CTV science and technology specialist Dan Riskin, thank you.
So it is the holiday season right now, and while it's all about light and joy and togetherness, we know it is a particularly challenging time for people who are struggling with grief.
Yeah, we want to share this conversation we had on the show with author and poet Molly Peacock. She's written a new book about her own personal experience with grief after the death of her husband, and she shared the many emotions that came out of it.
I'm glad we had this conversation. Her book is called The Widow's Crayon Box.
Molly, you described the process of grieving your husband as experiencing life, and I'm quoting you here, with all 152 colors of the crayon box. What does that mean?
It means that I was experiencing not just that single color where I was supposed to be wearing a mauve bathrobe, crying at the end of a couch. I was experiencing so many different emotions. It was beyond the 8 basic colors. It was the whole 152. So that's joy, thrill. Was I supposed to be having joy while I'm also feeling sad, also feeling loss? I realized all of those colors of emotions were mixing together. And that's when I started writing the poems in the book.
And I think there's a release in realizing that it's very normal and okay to feel all those feelings.
It is. It is okay, but we tend to think that it's not quite that it's not okay, it's that we're supposed to be feeling grim, feeling loss all the time. But it's variable. And all kinds of things interrupt us and happen to us, and we don't know. You never know what you're going to be feeling at the same time as you're feeling something else. So you can feel lonely, and you can also feel interested in something. I mean, and you can be slapped by the loss of that person. You think you're all right, you turn a corner, and you're overwhelmed, or feel a little bit of the ghost of that person.
Well, you don't know when you're going through it, but your book does an excellent job of perhaps providing a path for people. It's divided into 4 parts, after, before, when, and afterglow. What's the reasoning behind that structure?
I felt that I had to start with after so that people would know where I was and where they could join me. And I start off with a poem called Touched, and I say, now that I'm not touched, but moved. And so there's just that little sense of, kind of a tactile reality. And I say in that poem, I'm so lonely that anything moves me, even the head of a dog in an elevator leaning against my knee. And just to bring people into really ordinary, specific things that happen after the loss of a beloved. And then I go into before, because you need to know the love story. We met in high school. And I'm in my 70s now, so it's a long story. And then I do tell the story. My husband was a 40-year cancer survivor. I tell the story of his ending at Princess Margaret, and then go back into what's happening now.
For people who are watching, if they themselves or someone they know is going through a grieving process, how can we best support them?
I think the best thing to do when you're grieving and you're at a loss is to make something. Now, I make poems, but I mean making anything. I mean making marmalade. I mean simply making dinner. Anything that engages you. And now that it's the holidays, there's a lot of different kinds of making that we do, and because your life is out of control, and making something, even if that's knitting a scarf, it gives you control in that moment.
Right now in Ontario, there are more than 52,000 people waiting to access support services. These are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. This funding, it is a lifeline to help with everyday activities that allow people to work and live in their communities, and it helps support their families. But since 1993, the Ontario government has increased funding to community service groups by less than 7%. Well, think about the cost of living. Think about your cost of living. I mean, it has increased in that same time period by more than 60%. So here to tell us more is Logan Tasevsky, who is living with a disability in Ontario. She's joining us with her dad, Mike, along with the CEO of Community Living Ontario, Chris Beasley. Good morning to all of you. It's great to have you here today.
Good morning.
Logan, great to chat with you today as well, and your dad, Mike. How does it feel knowing that you have to wait for these support services?
It makes me feel very anxious that it takes so long to do everything, like get us support, get places to go. It takes very long to get on a list. I've been on a list for like 14 years. So it takes a long time. But now that I have been out of my parents' house for a long time, I have felt the best I have been in a long time, that I can do independent things, go to work, go on the TTC, get places on my own. I feel that people with disabilities can't do the things that I can do. The best thing, like getting out on the TTC, going on my own, that it makes me feel very excited, happy, that I can do things by myself now.
Of course, and how important that is. Mike, when we talk about these support services, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, I think for us it's just navigating. I mean, at the end of the day, and my wife is a real workhorse at finding things and uncovering things, but we talk to so many families and they're in very similar situations. When you look at it, 14 years is a long time to be on a waiting list, but I think what it is for us as parents is the longevity. So both my wife and I are in our early 60s, And we're thinking, what's happening for the future? What do we need to put in place to make sure Logan has that life that we've given her over all these years? So I think the biggest thing is funding. It's the lack of funding. You know, community living does a phenomenal job to help families, but when you lift the hood, it's almost like they're dealing in crisis mode on a regular basis, and it shouldn't be. It should be more proactive. You know, work with the families at an early stage in their lives to really understand what's happening for the future. And that way, you know, it doesn't hurt the system at the same time too. So it takes the pressure off the system and it alleviates the pressure for them to always deliver on the crisis versus having long-term relationship with families. I think that's where the change could really happen. But the funding's needed to do that, and the people and the resources.
Chris, 14 years on a list?
Yeah.
14 years?
Yeah. It's, you know, it's as Mike said, it really is about resources and funding. And I think if the agencies had enough resources and had some consistent investment that they could plan for and welcome people into their services, you know, as you said at the top, we've got 52,000 people waiting. That's compared to less than 35,000 who are actually receiving the supports they need. So there's a huge gap there. People want to be involved. They want to do the things that Logan's talking about. Some need a little support and some need a whole lot. So the money is really about closing the gap on the kind of supports that people need and funding that gap. You know, our campaign right now is called Waiting to Belong. Everyone belongs. When you're born, you belong, right? You're part of the human race. But then there's barriers that come up. There's things that we need to consider if we want to make sure that people belong throughout their lives. And so, you know, investment in the agencies on a consistent basis and funding to, you know, get people off these wait lists so that they can actually do the things they want to do in their community and actually contribute ultimately. You know, Logan works, you know, and is out there and helping people, working in a coffee shop. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah, Logan, tell me about your job.
I work at a cafe that's called Little E. It's for disability people. They hire 15 people. It's a 2-year contract that you go for 2 years and then they kind of want you to move on to another job.
But tell her what you now, where you're
So I think we're looking at video of you right now working. So this is you working. Tell me about what a day's like for you. What are you doing?
That was me making a coffee. I make coffee. We do other jobs, like there is prep duty, there is till duty, there is cleaning duty, and we also do other things besides, like we try to go out in the community. That we try to, like we did a Scotiabank pop-up for like one day. It was pretty good, but it wasn't the best, but we tried the best to do this pop-up. And the manager, two managers that were there, only one manager came because the manager someone had to stay at the cafe for the other people.
Sure.
Also, because they saw that I was doing a great job at Scotiabank, they gave me another job at Scotiabank.
Wow.
Starting in January, I'm not sure what day yet, but they gave me a job at Scotiabank. Pretty much doing the same thing, just not doing the coffee part yet. I'll be doing till, I'll be doing cleaning duty. I will be doing other things, pouring coffee and stuff.
Logan, congratulations. Obviously, you're doing an amazing job. And Dad,
my wife and I were in tears, actually.
Well,
we got the phone call, and it's those simple things that bring so much joy to us.
Of course.
You know, because a lot of things keep us up. It's not just me and it's other families. There's a lot of things that are on their mind. Like getting a job is just, it's so fulfilling for our family to see Logan flourish as well. She's going out to the workforce just like we are, early in the morning and working. And those are some of the big wins that we look at, and we're just thrilled to see it for Logan. But a lot of families I speak to have those same questions. You know, a lot of things, Chris, that's on, and I know we've spoken, on their minds are ODSP, housing, can they get a job? Because it's for the future more than this. And that's what you're looking for. You want them to be settled into an environment that they're happy to live in, that they can prosper. and then just have the same purpose as we do
We
every
all want
day.
that for our children.
We do.
Well, we
They wanna
appreciate
belong.
the three
They
of
want to
you.
belong. I think that's what it
Absolutely.
is. It really is.
Waiting to belong.
Yeah.
Everyone belongs.
They do.
Thank you for being here this morning. Congratulations. Excited to hear what you're going to be doing in January. And thank you all for being here today.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
And don't forget to go listen to our special extra podcast, the full 24-minute unedited conversation with India Hicks.
And you can always watch us live weekday mornings on CTV CTV News Channel or on your CTV News app. Start your morning with us.